everybody. It is 1 Eastern, so we are going to get started. So thanks so much for joining us today for another Gimmal education session. My name is Marcia Shields, and I'm from our customer success team. Our goal for these sessions are to enhance your expertise with your Gimmal software. As you heard, we are recording this session and it will be shared after the event. Tim, could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Great. So Tim Butler is with me today. Tim's your subject matter expert and is going to be talking about Gimmal Physical. Tim's going to be reviewing how this application can be tailored by using preferences. This is a switch of topic at the last minute, so sorry about that. But we will be covering the disposition enhancements in a future session. We just were not completely ready to reveal that yet. Any questions for today? If you have them during Tim's time, please post them in the Q&A area and we will get to them after the demonstration. And yes, thank you, Tim. So just for attending today and also registering, you've earned some Gimmal All-Star points. Our All-Star program is new this year, but for attending education sessions and participating in polls and such, you are accumulating points to receive a Gimmal All-Star pin. More details on that for winners after you get to 3,000 points. Format today will be the 15 to 20 minutes of demonstration. And like I said, we'll do questions after that. But before I kick it off to Tim, I'm going to launch a quick poll if you don't mind. Today's question is, are you currently using role-based preferences anywhere in the Gimmal Physical application? So I will leave that running for a bit, Tim, because more people are coming in. But otherwise, Tim, I think you can get started.
All right, good. Thanks, Marcia. Appreciate that. Let's jump over to the Gimmal Physical application. And yes, welcome everybody. Happy first day of spring. I hope it's great weather where you are. It's pretty good here on the East Coast. So end of winter, brighter days are coming, hopefully. Yeah, and I want to add to what Marcia said. We really did want to show you guys the new disposition functionality, but we actually, guys, what we did is we rolled that into, along with another change, something we're very excited about, and just sort of a sneak peek for some of you, we're actually rolling out a new interface we're pretty excited about. So we decided to combine the new interface along with the disposition enhancements into a single release. Because that did delay things just a little bit, but just so you're aware, apologies there. I hope you'll get some use out of this discussion on preferences that we're looking at today. In the end, guys, the preferences, they really are just focused on ease of use, if you will. There's roughly speaking about 100 different preferences where you can configure the values to make the application look and behave in different ways. No way we could get through nearly any of the, or all of the 100. So we're going to focus on just a handful of the ones that I think are most useful right away for everyone. Hopefully you're already familiar with a bunch of these, but if not, I hope you learned something new here to make the life a little easier, in particular for your end users. To that end, in my little demo application here, I'm going to click on Preferences. Please appreciate, guys, depending on the version of the software you're in, things may look slightly different, but on the whole, everything is still in exactly the same place. You can see the different categories of preferences here. We're going to focus on application homepage, and we'll take a quick look at some box preferences. By the way, when I do cover the boxes, everything that applies to boxes is virtually identical for all these other tabs as well. But let's come back up here to the application preferences and talk about some of the more useful, at least the ones I think are more useful. I want to draw your attention, number one here, guys, to the second preference. I'm pretty sure most of you are pretty familiar with this wildcard behavior, but it surprises me sometimes on support calls and clients just are not aware of this. So just to make sure you are, your system by default, it usually ships with the wildcard behavior defaulted to this value. Personally, I always change it. I like it to look like this, auto beginning and ending. So I want to show you quickly what these three different values do: no implied, auto ending, and auto beginning and ending, how that affects the behavior of the application. To do that, I'm going to jump back to the boxes tab here. I'm going to be a little bit silly, but just to illustrate the point here, I'm going to go ahead and search in this box ID field by the number 2. right? So I'm kind of pretending I'm an end user. I'm looking for a box, and all I can remember is the box ID had a number 2 in it. I know, a little bit silly, but again, just to illustrate the point. So when I search by 2, because of the setting in preferences there, the software is smart enough to know. Notice when I hover over the rollover feature here, it says find all boxes where box ID contains 2. And sure enough, if you were to look through this first column, all these box IDs, they all contain the value 2. Because when you set the preference to auto beginning and auto ending, it's looking for a 2 anywhere within the field. Now let's jump back into preferences. Let's alter that preference value. Let's change it to no implied wildcards and save those changes. Let's come back now to the boxes tab one more time. And let's go ahead, save a little bit of time, cancel that, and let's search by the value 2 again in box ID. You'll notice this time no results come back. Why is that? Because if I hover over the rollover, it's really saying now, because there's no implied wildcard, it's saying find all boxes where box ID equals 2. Well, none of them equal 2. They had a bunch of other digits within. And then, of course, there is that third option open to you. What was usually the default of your system when it was delivered to you is auto ending. So let's just do a quick example with that. Come back in and perform that same search with the number 2. Come on, you can do it. And really, you're going to see very close to what we saw the first time, because it just so happens, guys, again, if I hover over the rollover, it's saying find all boxes where box ID starts with 2. So key differences there in the way that functionality works in terms of that preference. You'll notice just so happens that all these box IDs, they begin with the number 2. Now, a couple additional points about that preference. If you choose, and I'm going to change it one more time to highlight this for you. Let me go back in and change it to no implied wildcards. And actually, regardless of your setting here, whichever of those 3 you choose, if you actually manually supply the wildcard, which for us is the percentage sign. So if you do this kind of thing, the software now assumes you know what you're doing. We're not going to pay attention to the preference. And so you're really saying here, hey, find all boxes that begin with a 2. This has the same effect as if you were using those auto ending value in the preferences itself. Or conversely, you could do something like this. You could just wrap it in percent signs. That has the same effect of auto beginning and auto ending, so you can search it that way. And although it doesn't come up very often, you could also do this kind of search, guys. Once in a while, there's occasion to do this. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do it that way. I meant to do it this way. You could just provide the value you're looking for. When you do this, though, I do want you to take note of the results here, because really what you're saying now is find all boxes where the box ID ends with 2. So you've got a bunch of flexibility there, guys, both in terms of the default behavior via the preference, and then also via the use dynamically of ad hoc providing the wildcards themselves. Now, I want to go back into preferences, talk about a second one here under application. And I want to focus your attention now, guys, on query limit. Really kind of subtle, but really important. What this value here affects, guys, in the end, it primarily affects one part of the behavior of the application, and that concerns reports. I actually just had this happen this past week on a support call with a customer, and they made the comment just kind of offhand, we love the reports, but we realize there's a limit. You can only have 5,000 records on your report. So I had to let, that was good news. I said, well, there's some good news here. The reason you're only seeing 5,000 is because of the preference here called query limit. So if you happen to run across that particular issue with reports, that's the only thing this really affects. If you're not seeing all the data you expect on a report, it's stopping after a certain number, there's a good chance it's because of this query limit. You can actually set this value to anything you want. By default, in most of the recent versions, we have defaulted it to 5,000. But again, you could bump that number up higher should you so desire. Let's jump back into preferences again, come back to application one more time. I want to bring you up top here. A lot of our clients are not aware of this particular preference, and for good reason, because it doesn't apply to all of our clients. But for those of you with larger organizations that are geographically dispersed, and even more specifically, guys, if you have multiple central repositories, whether that's file rooms or warehouses for your files and or boxes, there's a good chance you might want to make use of hub locations. Now, what do hub locations do? In plain English, in the end, what they do is they allow the software to drive requests to the appropriate people. Let me add a little bit of detail to that. If you want to use hub locations, you got to turn that preference to yes. If you're not using hub locations, you can leave it as yes or no. It doesn't really affect a lot, but to get the value out of it, set it to a yes. And then a couple of additional things have to happen in the application to make use of that preference. Number one is on your locations tab. And for those of you not exactly familiar, your locations tab is really primarily used to record or to house the most top level containment of items, typically warehouses and or file rooms. You notice in my demo, I've got 3 places here. 2 of them, Record Center 1 and Record Center 2, their hub location is set to true. So whereas this top guy here, Annex, it's set to false. So if hub locations are on, you get another piece of metadata here that you can set to true or false, designating whether or not these location records are hub locations. And then the last piece you have to apply here, guys, is over on the Users tab. We're going to look at just one user here. And typically, you would only need to do this for your records administrators or for those people whose responsibility it is to respond to requests. So if I come and take a look here at the super user, the one I happen to be logged in as, and I'll scroll down through the metadata for super user. Here's kind of the last piece, the last puzzle piece, if you will. Notice right now I've got super user only set up to be associated to the hub location of Record Center 1. Now, what does that mean? That means when end users issue requests, and let's just pretend this was for boxes in a record center, super user would only see and hear about requests for boxes that are in Record Center 1. He would be blissfully ignorant to those requests for the items in Record Center 2. So I'm hoping you can extrapolate, connect the dots. If you've got multiple record centers or central repositories, you can set different people to be responding to requests based upon which items they are responsible for. All of that made available to you via the hub location preference functionality. All right, let's jump back into preferences here, still under application. And let's talk about a really simple one, but I'm surprised how many people just never get around to changing this. On the application, you've got a handful of these confirmation preferences. Again, it depends slightly on your version, but usually by default, they're set to yes. Now, what does this mean? This means when you perform any of these activities, creating records, updating, transferring, or adding to the cart, let's just go with transferring. Let's come back to the boxes tab here. I do have mine set to yes. We'll go to boxes themselves. Let's grab one of these boxes here and let's do a transfer. When you do your transfer, I'm going to grab, I don't know, let's grab somebody out on my list here. We'll grab myself. We'll transfer it over to myself. So this is standard for everybody, right? Whether you're using barcode scanner that's hooked up or via the mouse and the keyboard the way I am. The preference we were just looking at, guys, this is what drives this message box. Now, initially, I think most folks like to see this. They just want that confirmation. Okay, Gimmal Physical, you did what you were supposed to do. You'd see a similar message box, right, guys, when you're creating a record, updating a record, adding to the cart. My suggestion to you, now I keep those preferences on because I'm demoing the application for brand new users very often. So I set it to yes, but just encouraging you to think about changing some of these to no. It just means one less click as you process through the activities that you're working through. So all those confirmation preferences. And then one more I want to highlight, not super important, but it is very new. Only for those of you in version 3.15 or higher will even have this preference. Session clock. What that allows you to do, mine is set to yes, or what it provides to you in terms of information, is up at the top of the application, you'll see that clock up there that kind of just it shows you how long you have until the application will time out. Now, mine is defaulted to an hour. Yours, by default, we actually start at 20 minutes. You may have coordinated with Gimmal Client Success to change that value. That's how you do that. But it can be really helpful, right, for end users who are sitting there for quite a while not doing anything to know how long until their application interface times out. By the way, if you do change that preference to no, the clock will still appear, but it just reads all zeros. So it doesn't give you any kind of a helpful information there whatsoever. All right, so that's session clock. Let's jump over now to the home page and talk about a few preferences, or just a couple of preferences here. Records per page. Your mileage will vary with this one, guys. And again, it varies depending upon the version of the software that you were in. For the later versions, here are your choices, 10 through 500. A little bit of explanatory notes here. Previous to, I think, I'd have to go back and look it up to be sure, but I think previous to version 3.12, for those of you in older versions, this is actually not a drop-down list. It is a text box, and you can actually type in any value you want. And I'll come back and talk about that in just a minute, why we changed that in later versions. For some of you, I think in versions 3.13 and 3.14, you only have values 10 through 100, but now in the later versions 3.15 and 4.0, which will be coming out next month, you have up through value 500. Now, why did we change it from a free-form open text box to a drop-down list? The reason was this, guys: when it was an open form text box, it just kind of got abused. Some users said, oh, awesome, I can set this to anything I want. And sure enough, it would happen. And so people would set it to 10,000, 100,000. And if you had enough people in the application doing that, all hitting the application at the same time, it could really hamper the performance of the application. So for a couple of versions there, we really locked it down to 100 was the max. But we got some complaints that was a little too restrictive, so we did open it back up to 500. We don't know what the happy medium is exactly, but no, for now, 500 is the maximum. What this affects, of course, is anytime you run queries back over on any of these grids, it's how many rows of data will return, and it does affect all of the grids at the same time with the same behavior. How many rows of data will appear in this grid? So be aware of that for the records per page preference. And then one more I wanted to call out there on the home page was this guy right here, this default search on home page. Now, initially, yours will look like this, quick search. You can change this to full text. Now, why would you want to do that? Purely my opinion here, guys. I happen to think that the easiest, most efficient, most intuitive way of searching in Gimmal Physical is via this area called the quick search. So a lot of stuff built into the quick search in terms of it's configurable. You can pack a lot of functionality in terms of comparison operators and Boolean operators and keywords. I do believe it's how most of our end users most of the time do all their searching. However, we totally get it. And most of you are aware, we strongly encourage you to roll your software out to the masses, right? It's browser-based. Nothing whatsoever needs to be installed on their devices. If they have a browser and a login that you've provided, they have everything they need to access the software. Well, sometimes the complaint does come up from end users that says, oh, wow, Mr. and Mrs. Records Manager, I don't understand. There's too many fields here. I don't know how to search this way. We get it. So if you want to, under preferences, if you set the default to full text, what it means is the default will look like this. Now it's like Google, right? It's a single word or a single phrase they can type in. Then the software will do the hard work for you in that it'll search across all of the text-based fields simultaneously. So wanted to point out those couple preferences on the home page. And then quickly, guys, here we're going to look at just a few preferences here under boxes, which would apply to a number of those tabs. Number one, going to talk about enable carry forward. Can be super helpful. Now, again, we default this to yes, but if by chance you set it to no, you're not going to benefit from it. And even if it is set to yes, there's one other thing you got to do to really get the value from this preference. Before I go show you how you would configure it, let me show you the value of it. Let's come back to the boxes tab. Going to ask you to kind of note the difference here. If I'm not focused on any record, I haven't selected one, if I just click on the create button to begin to create a new box, I want you to try to just keep in mind for a moment the values that you see that are in these fields. Guys, these are all via default values. That is, as an end user, as a one-time effort, I came in and I set these fields the way I wanted, and I clicked on the Set Defaults button. So these are my defaults, what you see here. However, if I select a record first before clicking on that Create button, so let's grab this guy right here and now click on Create. Notice this time on the Create page, it's a whole different set of values, because the way the software actually works is it looks at carry forward. It says, okay, if they have carry forward turned on, then I'm going to carry forward. These are the values that were on the record that we had just selected. And where this is super useful, of course, guys, is if you're going to be entering a number of data records in succession, and they're all very similar in terms of their data values, you simply just change the one or two fields you want to change, click on that Save and New button, and then you can quickly, yet again, create one record after another. Now, one other piece of information you need to be aware of here to make carry forward work for you is under Admin, under the Field Display section, for every tab of the application, in this case boxes, you do have to check those fields that you want to be carry forward, right? If none of these were checked, then really carry forward would do no value for you, or provide no value whatsoever, even if you had it turned on. So be aware, it's a two-step. Turn it on, come in here and set the values, check the fields that you want to actually be carried forward. Coming back home, just a couple more here, guys. Let's come back to boxes. A couple of really important ones: default current location and default home location. I want to highlight those. Again, your system will default the default current location. Actually, every time you add a new user to your system, we set this preference for you. It will be the unique ID, which is a barcode. This happens to be a special barcode for my super user, but every user has a barcode. And so we set the default current location, the barcode, to them, because we just assume, right, if they're doing the data entry for a box or a file or what have you, its initial default current location should be them. Default home location, however, we leave it blank initially because we just don't know how you're going to be set up. But the idea is you would want to set default home location to that centralized location where the file or the box will wind up. If we come back to the boxes tab to make this a little bit more concrete, hopefully here, I'm going to go ahead and clear what I've got here. Oh, I could have kept that up. Let me go search again. Focus your attention on current location and home location. So notice this record right here that was created by super user. Well, where is it initially? It's with super user, but we want to know the home location. Where is it going to wind up? Or another way to say that, where is it supposed to be when it's not in circulation? We actually drive quite a bit of functionality, guys, based upon the comparison of these two pieces of metadata. And furthermore, until you get a home location set, you cannot even use this request pickup functionality. There's more that could be said there, guys. I'll leave it at that based upon the time we have. If you want further details, let us know. Let Marcia know. We'll reach out to you and get you those additional details. But really important when it comes to preferences for boxes and for file folders, if you're tracking at that level, make sure you get default current and default home set. Now, other two really broad points, guys, before I stop talking at you about preferences. Most of you are aware, I think, of this scope column over here. And let's just briefly talk about it. There are 4 different scopes you can set, and they're kind of mix and match. It varies depending upon the page of preferences you're on. They're pretty self-explanatory. User means, okay, whatever is set here is going to be specific for the user who is logged in. If it is set to system, like that second one there, that means you as the records manager, whatever value you set here, this will apply to everyone in the system, which means they won't have any control over changing it. All right, it is what it is. They're going to have to live with whatever you set. So that's user, that's system. Those are the 2 easiest to describe. There is a third category here called role. That's not used a lot, but it's kind of in between, as you would expect, right? What it allows you to do is say, okay, I don't want to have this preference available user by user, but I really don't want to set it across the whole system. If you choose the value of role for the scope, you're not going to find a way on the preferences page to go change those values. And what you'll have to do, because you've now kind of relegated the management of that over to roles and permissions, if you come to your permissions page, notice this second column here, which most of you have probably never touched. But if you do set the scope of a preference to role, you then have to come to the role page, role by role, and for whatever preferences you've given a scope of role, they will now appear on this page. And you can set them. You have the flexibility to set them role by role, but it does mean extra work for you. You now have to set these for every role in the system. Last broad point I'll make here, guys, is when it comes to the preferences, this set as default can be super useful. What it really does, and I'll just leave it at a 1 or 2 sentence description here. When you set the preference, especially if you're going to use the user scope, if I set it to yes, and then I click set as default, that means even though I've set the scope to user, I've defaulted it for everyone across the system until they come in because they have access to user level preferences and they change this value to something they want. So another way to say that, set default sets it for everybody until a user comes in and sets it for themselves to override the default that you have set. All right, a lot of preference information there. Marcia, I'm going to bring you back into the conversation. Do we want to take a look at the poll responses, or do we want to tackle
Yeah.
questions?
Well, we're going to do both. So yes, on the poll, so today's audience, 70% of the audience do use role-based preferences. So
Wow, I'm
yeah,
shocked, actually.
that's
Good.
a good amount, and all the info today will hopefully be helpful. So we have quite a few questions, Tim, so bear with me for a second. Let's try to start with the latest first. So one question is, can everyone set their own defaults?
No, that's actually a security right. So this set as default is intended for the administrators to set. But in case the question was asking about, I don't want to mix and match the things here. Recall when you're creating records over on the create page, when it comes to individual values for individual fields, then the answer would be yes. On the create page, every user who has the ability to create records can set their own defaults.
Okay. This question is in regards to change default current location under box preferences. Example is I'm working on creating a box. If I change that default current location, I'll be able to find that box under my name until I change it to a different location.
The way that's worded, that is correct. What this really means is as soon as the box is created from the very moment, it will show it under this location until you transfer it elsewhere, and then it's wherever it is you have transferred it to.
Okay. Okay. This one goes back to hub locations, Tim. Does the hub locations drive how requests permission show up in the request navigation tab?
Sort of, kind of a two-pronged answer to that. There's a set of rights, guys, that govern the request. Won't have time to get in there right now. That mostly are intended for the records managers. But just so you're aware, excuse me, every single person who issues a request, by default, every person can see their own requests. But the hub locations, you will only see here up on the request, both in terms of however you are going to view your requests. It can be via the link here. It can be via a pick list report. It can also be via email notification. All three of those are affected by that hub location setting. We use that to really drive the alert, the notification of who should be hearing about the incoming request.
Okay. All right, got one more for you, Tim, then you're off the hook, I think. Is there a way to set the query limit so it is not limited to a certain number of results?
The answer will vary. Back in the day, and you can actually test this yourself, and I forget, you'd have to go back a number of versions. It used to be you could actually put a -1 in that value, which was kind of our backdoor way of saying unlimited. We deprecated that feature somewhere along the way, but you can test it yourself to see what happens if you put a -1. But just put in a really big number. You can type in 1 million there if you want to, or whatever value you need to, and it will essentially do what you're asking. Keep the reports, let them run for as long as they need to.
Great. That's it. That's all the questions, Tim. So
All right, good.
yeah, if you don't mind going back to the deck, I just want to show everybody the upcoming schedule. Yeah, thank you. Great. So yeah, that's a wrap for the session today, everybody. Thank you for joining. We hope you got a lot out of this. As mentioned, it is being recorded, so we'll send that to you once I get the recording. It'll also be posted on our YouTube channel at Gimmal Solutions via YouTube. This is our upcoming Q2 schedule. Invitations will be going out on Mondays, so keep an eye out for that. But as you can see, we got the disposition enhancements and workflows on the schedule for May. But if you're going to be joining our April user group, which will be announced next week as well, it is April 16th. We'll also be talking about those enhancements, the new UI 4.0 that's coming soon. So in any case, we appreciate you joining us today. If you have any suggestions for future sessions, please do reach out to me. I'll be happy to add those to the list, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you so much.